Hey guys, it's Q&A Tuesday and I get to turn around in my chair because I'm back in the office COVID-free. Let's get to some questions right after the intro. Here's a question from Simon. Guam, Micronesia. Wow, it's the one place I haven't been to. Roman, can you discuss Parmigiani? I really like their watches. I like how they appear to be a one-stop shop. I like how they do watchmaking apprenticeships in-house. They seem like a very traditionally minded watchmaker. Yet I really struggle to find content on YouTube about the brand and haven't heard you or other channels really talk about them. What am I missing? I apologize, I have not watched all of your content, but not all of it. So quickly to tell you about Parmigiani, I actually did a video of Parmigiani. I'll have Ian linking below. I showed some Parmigianis on what's on my desk and I discussed the brand. Where I said I am a fan of the brand, but the reason I still decided to go with your question is because of this one specific phrase. I really struggle to find content on YouTube about the brand. And it's not just about finding content on YouTube, it's about finding content everywhere. Goes back to the theory, well, goes back not really a theory, but what I always say, like, look guys, a lot of these social media accounts are based on likes, activity, engagement, how many followers, et cetera, and that's how they in turn can make money by becoming influencers. If I want to grow an Instagram account or a TikTok account or something like that, so I'm going to post the hottest thing, Rolex, Patek, Richard Mille, Patek, and things that are super duper hot, right? And I won't post a Parmigiani because it's not going to get a lot of likes. In fact, if I scroll through my Instagram feed, and you will see me posting Parmigianis, but yet they don't get a whole lot of likes. So I agree with everything you said about a Parmigiani. The brand itself makes beautiful watches, and there's a lot of horological value behind it. So what Parmigiani needs to do is kick it in gear, get a few kick-ass ambassadors behind them, get influencers, because you can pay influencers on YouTube, you can pay influencers on Instagram to push the brand, and take the brand where it's supposed to be, in line with where it should be popularity versus the horological value that you get with those watches, right? My favorite Parmigiani watch will be the Bugatti Tourbillon. That's the one that is worn sideways, so the idea is when you drive the car, you can see the time, right? So you're not missing anything. Parmigiani is a victim of itself. It's not doing what it's supposed to do in terms of marketing. In fact, if Parmigiani took note of Hublot, that would be a lot more successful. I know you're gonna say, oh my God, Hublot? Yeah, Hublot is a great marketing machine, which is why to me, they're probably in the top 5 brands today. Even though they make a ton of watches, a ton of limited editions and so on and so forth, still they do a great job at marketing, and Parmigiani is just not, unfortunately. I wish they did. But there's always good news, right? Yin yang. There's a little bit of good in every bad, and that little bit of good is that as a client, if you're someone that appreciates Parmigiani watches, this is something you can get out there and pick up at a significant discount. So we've sold Parmigiani watches brand new as cheap as 50, 60, and even 70% off retail. So for you, it's a win. Here's another one from Zach that I'll quickly answer because, again, I do have videos on these. Love the videos and I have an idea. How about a segment to discuss Christophe Claret and his work with other brands? His watches aren't too well known and many people would probably be interested in seeing the work he has done for other companies such as GPU and Graham and others. I've met Christophe Claret. I've met him in Basel. Interesting individual, an artist in its own right and a hell of an engineer because some of the horological feats he has put together is absolutely insane. There's a couple of videos on what's on my desk. Again, Ian will link them below where I showed off some of his creations. In fact, there was an episode where I showed 3 or 4 of his different creations and excellent watches. But what a lot of people don't know is he's also the man behind a lot of other brands. Whenever a brand has an avant-garde idea or something that's absolutely nuts that they want to achieve, he is the guy that they reach out to. I mean, this guy created the blackjack watch. This guy created a tourbillon watch that uses magnetic fields to show time, where the tourbillon is supposed to negate the effect that gravity has on a watch. Kind of a, you know, catch-22, if you will, but the watch works. I've had the watch, I've sold the watch. It's a hell of a watch. But check out those videos, Zach. You'll see me talk about Christophe Claret in more detail, but definitely a good idea. I just wanted to mention this in the Q&A so your question doesn't go unanswered. Here's a good question from Mohammed, and Mohammed writes, hello, Roman, can you please do me a favor and on your next Q&A or even in this message, answer a question for me. What are your thoughts on the Daytona Pan Am? How many were made? Has one ever been sold in auction? And lastly, what would one fetch in the current market? Thank you so much, Mohammed. So the Pan Am Daytona was the first special order Daytona, or the first special order Rolex delivered to the United States. The Pan Am dial is actually a dial of its own. The dial had to be reconfigured. It wasn't a regular Daytona dial that was stamped with the Pan Am logo. They actually had to move the word Rolex and oyster higher on the dial in order to fit that logo. You'll find the same thing on like the Oman Khanjar logo Daytona, some of the earlier ones. So this isn't something that, oh, they took an existing dial and stamped it. They actually reconfigured the dial. So it's a dial all of its own, which is all the rage. This thing came with the Bakelite bezel. And oddly enough, you think about Pan Am, the first thing that comes to mind is the GMT Bakelite that you saw in all the vintage ads, right? Pan Am and Rolex, right? And you saw the GMT Bakelite. You didn't see this thing advertised anywhere. How many of those were made? So you guys are more familiar with the Oman Daytona and the Quabus Daytonas. I don't know if I have the pronunciation right, but Ian can pop a picture up on the screen. So the Sultan's Khanjar, or the signature emblem, got printed clearly visible on the dial. Now, everybody in the Rolex world thought that Special Order Sultan Qaboos bin Saad Al Said had made throughout the UK Rolex represented Asprey, where the only ones know were ever made by Rolex. But in fact, the Pan Am Daytona was Rolex inspiration for the later Arabic Daytonas. How do we know this? It's pretty simple. Pan Am Cosmic Grab Daytona is a 3.5 million serial, where the Arabic Daytona start with 3.65 million, thus later Rolex production. It's also engraved on a case back, both matching. So theoretically, there should have been 150,000 of these made. Yet, we don't see any of these around, and we don't see them at auction. It's funny, I was talking to my buddy Adam from Mental Watches. You guys have seen him on my show a couple of times. And I asked him that same question. You know what his answer was? He said, how many have been made? He said, who the f knows? And to the question, how much would that fetch in the current market? His answer was, whatever one is willing to pay for one, should you actually find one of those pieces. So I know I didn't shed a whole lot of light into your actual questions. I just thought I'd give you a little bit of background on the Pan Am Daytona, what it was all about. But as my buddy Adam said, who the f knows, basically. Here's a question from Viota. Hope I got that right. Hey Roman, thanks for all the content you produce. As a fellow Slav, I appreciate your no BS approach to sharing information about watch trends and your own views. I have a question where I'm looking for advice and a question which is more a debate on which I'd appreciate you could kindly share your view on. So first, you want to know, I have the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Offshore Chrono, reference 26470OR, and that's the one on the strap. And I want the gold bracelet for it. I find the watches unbalanced on leather. I prefer heavy watches, but I'd like your advice. Does it wear too heavy? Is it too showy? And what's the best way of getting the gold bracelet? I've already grazed the bezel because the watch is so tall. Would the bracelet potentially make it worse? I know AP will rip me a new one for a bracelet. In fact, they asked 40,500 pounds, which is some $55,000, a price I can buy a whole used gold bracelet offshore for. Should I trade mine in for one that already has a bracelet? Any advice going about this? Absolutely. I don't know why it's so expensive. I think it's stateside. That bracelet is only $22,000, like half that. Again, don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure it's not $55,000 for sure. Regardless of how much a bracelet is, you never really want to mess up a watch, for lack of a better word, by putting something on it that doesn't belong. Easiest example is to buy a Rolex that has a black dial, going out there, buying a blue dial, swapping it out. Now your card doesn't match to the watch because your card would always read that Rolex watch with a black dial. Much like with the offshore, your offshore is always going to read offshore on a strap based on model number, serial number, etc. So now you have an offshore with an extra bracelet that somebody may not want, right? And again, most people, if they're going to go for the offshore on the bracelet, unless there's a significant savings, which there won't be if you add a bracelet, they're going to go out and buy that. And that's exactly what I suggest you do. Take your watch, trade it in for a full brick, and go from there. Is this watch going to be flashy? Of course it's going to be flashy. It's a brick. It's a gold brick. It's going to be flashy. Your watch on a strap is flashy as is, and the bracelet is going to make it even flashier. Second question, more of a discussion. I disagree with you on the market of steel watches, specifically steel Rolex, though AP and Patek steel prices are derived from the Rolex steel prices. Let's agree to disagree on that one. Given the current economic situation of what the world will look like when it reopens in terms of massive joblessness, I see the steel bubble as a disaster waiting to happen. Watching numerous YouTubers doing watch reviews for collections, the middle class has collections with 60% steel Rolex. These people will be massively hit by the economic repercussions that are to come, and given 60% of their collections are in steel Rolex, will start offloading. As you mentioned, the market has been driven up by flippers and gray market dealers. Once the soon-to-be unemployed middle classes start liquidating, and they will liquidate that overpriced steel Rolex they have several of first. The bubble is done. Prices will plunge faster than the ruble in the 90s. A period we will remember. People who have jumped into assets who are benefiting from the massive money printing aren't really jumping into steel Rolex. They're going for high-end pieces. People hiding money in steel watches seem to be very middle class and likely much more susceptible to a downturn. How do you see this? It doesn't seem to be something you are too concerned about. I have to say, I am not too interested in Adrian's view on this. He has no concept of what a real crisis looks like. You do. With thanks in advance, keep up the good work, Viota. Okay, couple of things here. You bring up an interesting topic. First and foremost, neither you or I or anybody else out there knows whether we're heading for an economic downturn. That's number one. Yes, America has been printing money like crazy, and as a result, everything is up. Housing market, high-end goods market, be it jewelry, art, antiques, fancy cars. The stock market's up, cryptocurrency is up, metals are up, precious metals are up, everything is up. And I know that what goes up must come down, and our economy is usually in curves, but that curve is usually upwards regardless. Yes, there's dips, it goes up, it goes down, but at the end, it ends up going up regardless, right? I'm not gonna sit here and act as if I'm the biggest expert in economics.
I'm not gonna debate you, Jerry. I'm not gonna debate.
I will say and mention the fact that I predicted the fact that coronavirus is not gonna crash the market, and that it's actually going to do the opposite, and it did, right? Due to shortage of goods. Now, the middle class has a collection with 60% steel Rolex. That could be true, that could be not true. It's not a number that you can derive. You can take an educational guess and to say that, yes, it is Rolex, because Rolex is the number one most popular brand out there, and it's somewhat accessible to middle class and other classes, right? It's even accessible to lower classes. I've seen people that had no business buying a Rolex, but they saved up a bunch of money and they went and bought it. One of the things I will disagree on is the fact that people that buy expensive watches, and right now, 20, 30, 40 years ago, Rolex was really not that expensive. Today, it is really expensive. The only ones that are going to get stuck are the ones that maybe buy them at the very, very height of the market, and there's a slight correction, and if they bought them simply to flip them. There's a lot of people out there that can't really afford to wear a $20,000 Rolex, but they'll buy it on a credit card, go to flip it, take a small profit, and continue doing that, making a little extra income. Those guys can potentially get hurt. But I guarantee you that 9 out of 10 people that have bought a Rolex to put on their own wrist will not be selling that Rolex. You're making it sound like the world is going to end, and all of a sudden everybody is going to go and start selling off their Rolexes. Put it this way, if a humongous financial crisis were to happen, I would call you Captain Obvious. Of course, there's going to be a crash, because if something happens in the likes of a crisis, yes, there's going to be a crash on that product. But it's not because everybody and their mother is all of a sudden going to dump all those Rolexes onto the market. It's because people are going to stop buying this stuff. And the minute people stop buying, the hundreds of thousands of people that are in the watch business, the flippers and the gray market dealers, along with authorized dealers, their sales are going to go down. And when their sales go down, they're going to start dropping prices. That's going to be the biggest cost, not people running back to the market to trying to sell off their stuff. Because look, an average person that's going to buy himself an expensive watch, it's not somebody that lives paycheck to paycheck. It's not somebody that's buying themselves a Rolex out of their kid's college plan money. It's not somebody that mortgages a house in order to buy themselves that particular Rolex. We're usually dealing with individuals that have excess income into where they're putting their watches. And most of the people out there believe what I say when I say watches are not an investment. They're treating them as expensive toys. Yes, there's going to be a few out there that invested into watches. Those are the ones that may potentially get hurt if the market downturns. But most people are not going to be running to sell their Rolexes back in the market. Prices will become lower when the demand becomes lower. And right now, the demand still outweighs the supply. And watch companies, including AP, including Patek, including Rolex, are smart about this. They know exactly how much to produce to keep the hype alive, to keep the demand higher than the supply. The cause of prices going down is going to be dealers holding tremendous stocks of this stuff that are going to start lowering prices in order to stay afloat. And that's really the best way I can reply to what you wrote. Hope that makes sense. Here's a good one from Martin. And I think I have answered a few of Martin's questions in the past. He's been a follower for a while. And he writes, listen, I was recently on a business trip in Dubai. I went to Dubai Mall, as you do, and went to Rolex. Nothing sports at all. I did see Emil Gauss in Bahrain airport. And this brings me to my question. I'm not sure if most people that do not travel a lot know that Rolex normalizes their price across markets. So if you're in a high 20% VAT market like the UK, the dealer in Bahrain with only 5% VAT sells the watch for almost the exact same price. Rolex most likely makes more margin in Bahrain. I purchased a VC overseas for 14,500 pounds, and the same watch is 19,000 in the UK. So VC does not normalize their prices, so a fantastic deal for me. And overseas, and less accessible than a Rolex, if you could buy one at retail. But given that the total output of VC is 23,000 watches a year against Rolex 800,000, why is the overseas not obtainable too? Again, because these companies all try to do the same thing. They try to keep the demand higher than the supply. That's why those overseas are not then attainable just the same. But to go back to your questions, yes, I've told you guys before, certain countries have certain VATs. So if you walk into a store in the US and you're buying something for $10,000, you're buying that same thing in the UK for, let's say, $12,000, whatever that 20% VAT may be. Some other European countries are 22.5, et cetera, right? So it seems to be like, hey, it's a good deal. I'm going to be in business in the US. I'm going to buy myself a watch for $20,000, which normally would cost me $24,000 if I were to buy back home in London, but there's a big but, and I discussed this in the past. What you're doing is technically illegal, right? Because if you take that watch, you buy it in the United States, and somebody stops you at the border with that watch, bringing that watch in without declaring it, they're going to make you pay that 20% VAT and I think 100% on top of it or whatever. I don't know what the rules are when you get caught smuggling expensive goods without declaration.
Anything to declare?
Yeah, don't go to England.
So my suggestion is not to do that. But if you do it the proper way, you buy it here for $20,000, you bring it overseas and you declare it at the border, you're still going to end up paying that 20% VAT and the price will be the same. So don't do it, is my only advice to you, Martin. Hope that helps answer your question. I've got another challenge in the subject line. Let's see what this one is all about. This one is from Alan. Alan has written to me a few times. Hey, Alan. Hey, Roman, this is both a simple and a fun challenge. Choose from your entire personal history with watches, the 3 watches, any make, any model, that you found to be the most complicated or to have an interesting complication you have enjoyed seeing. You must have either personally handled the watch or your company obtained and sold the watch, and not something you have only seen in the media. Explain why you chose those 3 and what you like and dislike about each watch. Glad you're getting better. Keep up the great work and hope we're all back on the road in some way soon. Well, I am better. I'm over Corona, thank God. Again, as I said, it wasn't so bad. Let's see. I just discussed Christophe Claret, and you know what? The Extreme 1 Tourbillon is probably one of the most interesting, amazing things that I have seen. The first time I saw that watch is when Mr. Claret himself showed it to me in Baselworld. And I flat out told him, I said, how do you even come up with ideas such as this? Again, the idea behind that watch, and I've shown that watch on my previous episode, the idea behind this is 2 glass cylinders alongside of the watch. One side shows the hours, the other side shows the minutes, and in those glass cylinders, there's 2 tiny little metal balls. And those metal balls, they go up and down, they show the time, and he utilizes magnetic force in order to do so. I can't even imagine how that watch works. And at the same time, it's a tourbillon. Again, tourbillon negates the effect of gravity on the watch, and all of a sudden you put a bunch of magnets in the watch, and it's supposed to be an accurate watch. And the coolest part about that watch is, let's say the watch is showing, 2:30, you take the watch, you shake it, the balls drop, right? You wait a little bit of time, this, that, and the other, you shake it again, and the balls will pop in and show you the current time. It's literally like magic. So that would be watch number 1 I would put on that list. I've bought and sold different variations of that watch, at least 4 or 5 pieces in the past. If you want to talk about the most complicated, I have sold the Sky Moon Tourbillon more than once in my career. I've sold the older versions as well as the newer versions, or the current versions that they have, both blue and black dial. And in the older versions, I've sold them in every metal that they existed. I sold quite a few of them, actually. So in terms of the most complicated watch, it's going to be that, but it's also going to be the Gerald Genta Grand Complication, the one that was made for the Prince of Brunei. Remember the guy that stole $50 billion? He was the big playboy buying all these expensive toys. Now, of course, the biggest complication of that watch was the Grand and Petite Sonnerie. I'm not going to get into the details of what that does. If you guys want to know about that, there is an episode where I showed a Grand and Petite Sonnerie watch, and you can check that out. The one that I had that was made for Prince of Brunei, and I don't know if Ian will ever find that picture because it was one of a kind. It was a Grand and Petite Sonnerie, retrograde time, and it was a tourbillon as well. So that was another super complicated watch that I've handled. In fact, I've handled my fair share of complicated pieces, hundreds of tourbillons, hundreds of different minute repeaters and combinations thereof. I've handled numerous grand complications from Patek, minute repeater tourbillons, minute repeater perpetual calendars. Too many references to name, but most complicated is, it's going to be that Genta watch, alongside with the Sky Moon tourbillons from Patek. Last but not least, I'm going to go with, I was still fairly green in the business. I got to play with a Ulysses Nardin Genghis Khan. And the Ulysses Nardin Genghis Khan, the mechanical complication tied to the minute repeater, is something that still impresses me till this day. I guess it came to me at a time where, I wasn't exactly handling $500,000 watches and up on a regular. And, to me, it was very, very impressive to be able to hold that in my hand, to actually say, hey, I bought this and I'm selling this. And the first time I remember holding it in my hand and setting off the minute repeater and seeing the scene of Genghis Khan come alive on the dial of the watch, to me, that was super impressive. What is it that I don't like about that particular watch is, again, the same thing, the same fate that Gerald Genta had, and that is the fact that the watch has gone down in value tremendously because trends have changed and people are willing to pay $400,000 for a chronograph versus a very complicated minute repeater tourbillon such as the Genghis Khan. So Alan, hope I passed your challenge. I hope you enjoyed that. With that, I'm going to finish off this episode and thank you guys again for all your questions. As usual, you know what to do. Email your questions to romansharf@luxurybazaar.com. As always, hit the like button, subscribe button. If you're not a subscriber, share this with your friend or those that you think may enjoy this content, and I'll see you guys next Tuesday.